Chats. We're just about to start the live panel session, so standby speakers will just change your status so you can join us on the screen. Dan's magically appeared here first. That's great, and Gemma too. So yeah, if we can just get Emmy, Guy, Ellie, and Jenny. Just turn your camera and mic on when that's enabled for you. Just as a reminder, we're going to have the live panel session now. Ellie Horwitch-Smith is going to be your chair for this session, and then at the end of this session, which will last sort of 30 odd minutes, we'll return to the tables. So when you get so if you are in mid-flow with your conversations, please resume those when we go back to the table mode at about 11:30. So just waiting for Ellie to come on, and then we'll get going. But in the meantime, I can just thank our speakers for their contributions this morning. Speakers, you'll see that there are quite a few questions on the right-hand side there in the Q&A. So the questions have been upvoted as well, so you can get some idea of the priority questions, and Ellie will be referring to those when she joins us on the panel session. Guy's there now. So here's Ellie. So I think we're all here. So yeah, thanks again for all your contributions. I'll come back on at the end once Ellie wraps up. But if Ellie, you're comfortable and everyone's sitting comfortably, I'll hand over to you.
Lovely, thanks very much, Graham, and apologies for the in and out. Just trying to sort out the kind of background mode. But yes, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I've been listening with avid ears into obviously all the presentations, but also looking with interest at your comments and observations and queries as well. So we've got a kind of quite a list of questions. So many thanks to all of you who have asked and kind of voted various ones up. We are going to kind of prioritize those that came at the top of the list, but hopefully we can get through as many of the questions that you've asked as possible. And obviously my many thanks to all of the panel members who have joined us kind of live here this morning as well for agreeing to come and pick up an answer on those questions as well. So just before we kind of kick off, I think there was a couple of questions I thought I would be able to, or some that I just wanted to pick up on before I start handing round, which was in relation to plans around non-domestic property stock. So given that kind of sits squarely with I and what we're doing to support our wider colleagues in our kind of wider property assets team, yes, we are obviously looking very carefully at our corporate property stock. We've done quite a lot of analysis on our scope 1 and 2 emissions as an organisation, and unsurprisingly, the kind of scale of property that we own has a big contribution to our organisational impact, and therefore is one of our priority areas. So yes, we are looking at that, but given that the focus of today is on the domestic market, we'll probably kind of move swiftly on, if that's okay. And if there are any follow-up questions around that, then please do put it in the chat, and perhaps we can pick up that conversation separately on another occasion. So without further ado, and I'm really, really pleased that Jenny, Imi, Gemma, Guy, and Dan have joined us. I'm going to just kind of kick off with the first question, if that's okay. And I think this is one that probably is directed both to Guy and also to Gemma. But maybe Guy, if I could come to you first. The question's around the quality or lack of information on the energy efficiency and condition of the housing stock, and what Birmingham and obviously Orbit have underway to improve the quality of the information, the access to that data, and the insights that leads in terms of informing them programmes of work. So Guy, over to you first, if I may.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very relevant point, because at the moment we've probably got energy efficient standard data on just under half of our homes, so it's about 25,000. Some of you may know that we're currently working quite closely with the regulator, and one of the aspirations of the regulator, certainly in the new consumer standards around stock condition surveys, including EPC information, is that we achieve is that we do 100% over a 5-year period. So since that engagement early January, February, we've put in place a number of both procured arrangements and internal arrangements to accelerate that stock condition information, with a focus on getting 12,000 a year, which will get us into that 5-year rolling program. We've got a bit of catch up to do. But you're right, in order to effectively direct our capital programs, grant funded programs, we need to accelerate that stock condition information. And as I say, we've got a number of providers lined up now, and including identifying internal resources to do that. But with a stock of 60,000, it's a challenge, and it's a considerable cost as well.
Thanks, Guy. And Gemma, over to you with the same question, if I may.
Yeah, so much like Guy, obviously there's a big focus on stock condition surveys. I think they're vital. As good as EPCs are, as I said in my presentation, we understand their limitations in terms of their 10-year kind of lifespan. I think one thing that is useful is using kind of software such as parity projects. I know there's other software very similar. We Orbit use that. And I think that really does allow you to overlay any additional information. As I kind of said in my presentation, stagnant data is kind of what is the limitation with a lot of these things. Building retrofit programs on stagnant data, when you have those retrofit assessments come back and things aren't quite as accurate, it can really, really impact your project. So I would say trying to keep that data internally as up to date as possible by overlaying your asset management data is a key focus as well. But yeah, getting that data collection from those stock condition surveys, it is a big challenge and a big investment piece for sure.
Great, thanks very much both. Okay, so moving on to kind of the next kind of highest voted kind of question. I think if I may, I'm going to kind of come over to kind of you, Dan. Obviously, whilst you haven't spoken directly in the sessions today, obviously you have been a very active part of the work behind the scenes on both ACOT's Green and Balsall Heath, as well as wider activity with Guy, who's giving you a round of applause there and then. But I think the question, and I think it would be really interesting to get also Imi's perspective on this as well, as a kind of community voice, is what we're doing now as the City Council to embed the experience and level of community engagement that we've seen, and the success and the empowerment that provides, and all of the fantastic things you heard from the Balsall Heath presentation as well, how we're building that into our plans around housing decarbonisation and retrofit. And Imi, I'd be really interested also in your view on what you feel we could be doing more of based on your experience, so we get those kind of two perspectives. So Dan, can I come to you first?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. So I think, yeah, we've obviously learned huge lessons from delivering the Sustainable Warmth programme and the LADS programme, and I know there are people on today who are from the community groups who were part of that and helped us to drive those programmes. And there's a real need, as several people have said today, for a far greater community-led approach to retrofitting. I think the projects we're working on at the moment, so SHDF as one is somewhat different because it's very targeted. So even before we started the project, we had a list of properties that the work was going to happen to. So there is loads of engagement going on with those individual residents, tenants, and that engagement is an ongoing process. But in parallel, we are developing a plan aligned with SHDF for more kind of community rather than just individual engagement as well, and really working and bringing in one of the other programs, the Eco program as well, which I'll come back to in a second. But so that plan is being developed as we speak. We actually bid as part of SHDF for an additional big pot of money to do more community work, which is fantastic. It's not fully being implemented yet, but that plan's being developed of how we do that, and that will lead to events happening, far greater kind of on the ground engagement, not just with the individual tenants, but also working with the local communities that SHDF is taking place in to offer for opportunity, employment opportunities, skills opportunities to those people in the community. So really could be a really exciting program. In parallel, we're working on the Eco projects, so the energy company obligation programs, which we are in the process of really trying to scale up at the moment. And the thing that we've really learned is, whereas SHDF is kind of citywide, there's a lot of different parts to SHDF across the city. We need to really be focusing in much smaller neighbourhoods, and that's what generates the kind of buy-in, the demand, and that community cohesion and engagement. I think that the video that Retrofit Balsall Heath and the community put together, it just shows that it wasn't just about retrofitting, it wasn't just about having solar panels, it was about that coming together as a community, which is absolutely fantastic.
Great, thanks, Dan. And Imi, without wanting to overload all the questions, I think there are a couple of others that I think might be quite pertinent for you to kind of give your view and advice on. One around the role of the faith community in the community kind of led engagement, but also one around how we empower community to be more involved in terms of the wider skills that are needed as well. There have been quite a few kind of skills related questions, but I think there's one related to the role of the community and how community can be involved in that skills profile that Jenny referred to. So I just wondered if you might be willing to pick up observations on those two as well whilst you're speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I guess there's kind of on the faith community part, I think it's, I mean, the work in Balsall Heath retrofit really shows how much, when you work with the existing trust networks, the existing belief systems, the existing infrastructure in a place, you whether it's the faith community or it's the knitting group or it's the school playground or it's the relationships in the PTA, like when you work within an existing network of trust organizing, why people are coming together, this makes a transformative difference, right? Because the backdrop of the squeeze on households and what people are going through right now is significant. Like going to yet another thing about something that you don't really know, and you've got to go and build deep trust, deep literacy, new relationships. You've got to, like, it isn't what this time and the coming years will require of us. And we've seen that change since COVID, particularly as just a range of societal, as I talked about, risks and challenges are like compounding onto people's lives in real time, whether that be in health, whether that be in their household budget, whether that be in what they worry about at winter. And therefore, the existing trust networks, the existing ecosystems are a really critical part to play, of which Balsall Heath have really shown how critical that was in their area, working with the different trusts and different spaces that, particularly from what I could see, was the Muslim community in Balsall Heath to really activate. And there's lots and lots and lots of evidence and historical, like, and ancestral stories of like why those trust mechanisms are critical when you want to make huge transformations. For me, that sits within a wider piece of like, what is the point of community engagement, right? Like what is this fundamental point? And I know that I'm going to be on the edge, and I'm okay. Like I live on the edge in most of these conversations, so I might be a little bit slightly different from what the conversations have been today, that actually fundamentally retrofit falls as part of a scale of transformation and transition in this country and around the world that we haven't seen in our like lives, right? We have yet not seen the scale of reimagination of how we live, how we eat, how we travel, the shifts, the changes, that if we have any kind of like connectivity to the just transition, the role that the countries like us have to play in terms of how we're thinking about our material and other use, given how much we have accelerated this crisis over the last 100 years. And therefore, in the middle of all of this is lots and lots of knotty challenges, lots and lots of knotty things that we need to unpack. And that can be seen as something terrifying and scary, and that's going to happen to you. And that means that you have to give up lots and lots of things. Or you can see that as a moment where things transform, where you have a way to be able to unlock your imagination, your skills, rebuild your communities where you live, the places you have most agency over and most desire for them to be beautiful, wonderful, safe places to live, right? And so our work is really situated in this space. It always has been, even before we were in the retrofit space. For us, retrofit became incredibly interesting because if the neighborhood is the scale that organizing that Dan talked about thrives at most, then the street is the scale at which you feel and experience those systemic crises like the energy crisis in your bill. And it was also the place you feel greatest agency and connectivity to do something, and in the long term maintain and look after that, because it's where you live, it's where your children are going to live, it's the place that you have most agency in a changing world. So for us, I think on the community engagement side, it's about situating retrofit as part of a set of solutions and ways to organize that are more practical, but in a wider story. And so what I think from the retrofit perspective, given we're at a retrofit conference, is that the role that the council particularly needs to play is around understanding models such as people-powered retrofit that are creating neighbourhood cooperatives where wealth, skills and resources are staying in places. I don't think at all from anything that I've heard at all in the neighbourhood that I'm from that has very mixed income and social experiences, that at the moment anybody sees retrofit as an opportunity for Birmingham business, for example, or the UK to make lots more money, or to, like, they don't see that link in a recovery. When we connect it to community wealth, community skills, community infrastructure, opportunities for young people, what's happening in the schools. Raft is a wonderful example of what is happening at a school layer. Then people can understand that actually, and what we see is that things like retrofit and everything that is around it, that is connected beyond just insulation and solar. The idea of community grids, the idea of collective organising. We've been doing street governance workshops with our demonstrator street, the fact that people can make decisions together, and looking, and I know there's lots of other layers to this, but what that connecting this moment to a wider moment, I think is really, really important. And so the last thing I would say is, if you understand community engagement as something whereby it's like the nice, it makes the serious work nicer, it will fundamentally fail. If you understand civic literacy, agency, and engagement at a community level as fundamental to the transition, just like it was fundamental to us getting through COVID, then you're in a different story. So there was a lot to hear about power relationships and a lot about mapping the infrastructures and civic infrastructures and organizations already in a neighborhood, and how the mission that the council is on connects to the mission they're on, and how this can be a wider story. But like the fundamental thing I'd want everyone to take away is stop seeing community engagement as something that makes your serious project nicer and a bit friendlier, and seeing it as really fundamental to how you move through periods of transformation, of crisis. And we've seen that with the NHS example. We saw it with COVID. There is a role that that citizens and the civic layer can play that no other part of society can when large transformation needs to happen. And if we can unlock that and connect that public civic piece with ambition, I think we'll be onto something that actually is like a snowball that keeps growing. Because who doesn't want, as I said at the beginning, a safer, warmer, cheaper to run home on a street that is safer, cleaner, and better for their children? There's no one who doesn't want that. It's just how we get there and how we understand what it's for. Is it to rebuild a new social settlement? Is it about community wealth? Or is it just a business opportunity? And I'm really clear that where society is at, especially the most marginalized and vulnerable, the business opportunity is not speaking to them in a way that is particularly interesting. It might be from their own skills perspective, it might be from the wealth and the rebuilding of their neighborhood, but if it's too far away from them, it just feels part of the same level of extraction that has got us to this position in the first place.
Thanks very much. I mean, there's some incredibly powerful messages and recommendations for all of us, but most particularly kind of how we're working. And obviously, we look forward to talking with you, I think, as early as next week about starting to embed some of this in. So thank you very much indeed. Jenny, I think it's time we came over to you. And there's been quite a few both kind of queries and questions as well as kind of the thoughts around what you presented and what wasn't in there as well as what was in there. So I just want to kind of pick up a couple, if I may. There's a question around the kind of the lack of kind of heating represented in terms of the trades in the scheme, if you could pick up on that, but also kind of building on the kind of role of community in the retrofit system. Also, some of the other kind of key components and key roles, both within local authorities and in other organisations that are not trades, and kind of where you see them sitting. And also just one final question around the number of retrofit coordinators that you quantified being required for the 2,000 homes. So if I could pass it to you on those couple of points and any others that you wish to pick up now, if not, we'll come back to them as well later.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ellie. So then just taking the first one around the measures that I talked about in the presentation. When I was doing the model, I was looking at the measures that were specified in the Birmingham City Council SHDF bid. That's publicly available information in terms of what measures they thought at the outset would be involved in retrofitting those 2,231 homes. I think the first thing to say is when organisations are bidding, and Dan, help me here if you know you're involved in that side of things. So to chip in if you want to. When organisations are bidding for public funding for retrofit, there's an indication of the types of measures that might be included in that project, but they don't really know, obviously, until they assess those properties, what those properties are going to need. So it's an indicative list of measures included in the scope at the outset when the bid is submitted, and that's what I was doing the analysis based on. But of course, once the actual assessment happens and qualified retrofit assessors look at the properties and make home visits and do those surveys, that's the point at which the actual measures will be known. So I was kind of modelling with the information I had, which is kind of how modelling sort of has to work. But that's not to say there won't be any heating. It's that's kind of the measures that were included at that stage. Then I don't know if Dan, if you've got anything to add on that. If not, I'll move on to the number of coordinators one.
I don't know how I've suddenly become big on my screen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I don't know what I've done there, but anyway, all I would add is just to reiterate what Jenny said in her initial presentation is the numbers are based on the current program, the SHDF program. Actually, this is a much bigger. If we're scaling up retrofit, we're talking about something much bigger than the next 2 years of delivering 2,000 homes. So whilst now we might not in that assessment we might not be talking about heating engineers and probably other skills as well, there will be the need for a real cross section of different skills over the coming years.
Thank you, Dan. So I'll go on to the one about retrofit coordinators. I think the question was, is 8 retrofit coordinators enough to inspect 2,000 properties? And no, it's definitely not. But I think the question, the person who asked the question was asking about coordinators, and they're not the individuals that would do the property assessments. That's retrofit assessors, and the figure for that through the model was 12, and that is enough as long as you assume, which I did in the model, and you can change all of these assumptions. You know, our model allows you to change all of these assumptions, but the assumption I made was that 12 retrofit assessors spending half a day per property. Which we tested out with industry is a good amount of time to do a comprehensive retrofit assessment. Working full-time for around about 4.5 months will assess 2,231 properties. So the model tells us that, working in that way, 12 assessors is what's needed. As it may well happen that that there are delays in projects. Often there's slippage in certain things. It may well happen that instead of doing 120 assessments per week, which is 12 assessors working flat out, doing 2 assessments per day, that was spread out over a longer period of time. It really depends on the kind of assumptions we're making about how the project is going to be managed and when that assessment stage is going to take place and how long it's going to take place for. But the assumptions I made, that 12 assessors working full-time, doing high-quality assessments, taking half a day each per property, that would take 4.5 months. That comes out as 12 assessors. And that's, again, picking up on what Dan said, that's just for that one particular project. That there are other projects, there's other funded streams of retrofit and non-funded as well through kind of able to pay and private landlords and that sort of thing. So that's specifically just for one project. Is that okay?
Thanks very much, Jenny.
Okay. There was one more question, Ellie. I've forgotten what it was.
Yeah, so that's in relation to the other supporting and kind of staff needed in both other organisations, but also the local authorities in order to help deliver these programmes and the capacity needed there. So if you could kind of make a quick statement, because I'm conscious of time and there's a couple of others I'd like to kind of ask the panel as well. So.
No problem. I'll be really quick. Yes, we know there's a need here for upskilling and training people on the client side, so at local authorities and housing associations, for whom they're dealing with something that is relatively new. All those PAS roles, that's fine. There's lots of professionals been trained, but then you find yourself, you might be a procurement officer and suddenly you're trying to procure a delivery partner to help you do retrofit, or you might be a project manager and you're suddenly the chap I know who works in public health, who is now the lead for retrofit in a county council that I know really well. There's a need for upskilling and just kind of sharing knowledge and helping those organisations to really understand what they need to do. And it's not that they need to become a retrofit coordinator or a retrofit assessor. That's wrong for them. And what we are doing is we're looking to develop some courses to address those exact roles. And if there's anyone on the call actually today from local authorities who would like to take part in a working group to help us kind of scope out what that need is, then that would be fantastic. We want this to be relevant and kind of co-designed. So if there is anyone that would like to be involved in that, these are courses that we have. They're our next set of new product development courses. So we would be more than happy to work with people on the call to help us develop those.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jenny. And a call to action for those who would be willing to participate in the conversation as well. I think as a follow-on kind of relevant thread, I'd like to come and ask Gemma and Dan if they would kind of share their own kind of thoughts on how local authorities and housing associations can and are sharing their experience. And I think there was a kind of follow-on related point around, is this leading to some kind of standardization in how we're approaching this kind of challenge around retrofit and the retrofit standards that we've got? So Gemma, may I come to you first for a quick fire response?
Yeah, so we at Orbit, obviously we do quite a lot of presentations, knowledge sharing, and I think that is really, really vital. It's sharing the experiences that we all go through. And I think what's really good is times like this when we can have those safe spaces where we don't just share the successes, we share the challenges and the learning from that. I think that's really crucial. We're all kind of experiencing, and obviously PAS 2035 coming in a couple of years ago, it is a big learning curve for everyone. And I understand that people don't always have the resources that we're so fortunate to have at Orbit, to have such a big team. And I think that's where it's really, really vital to share those learnings, share the material. And I think there's resources out there. There's, teams like SHAP and things like that, where we can really, really share those resources and help each other kind of grow and develop. And I think in working collaboratively as well, we spoke about that community base. Well, if we've got two HAs in a similar area, working like with the WMCA as a combined authority and doing those bids to support each other with that learning. So I think we're all on this journey. And I think sometimes we think it's a race. It's not a race against each other. We all need to bring each other on this journey to actually gain the success of net zero carbon to combat climate change.
Thanks, Gemma. Dan, did you want to add anything from the local authority perspective?
Not a lot to add. I 100% agree. This isn't about competing. This is about how do we learn together. Unfortunately, some of the funding streams kind of lead us into a competition sometimes. But to be successful in what we're all trying to do here, we have to be collaborating. Continue to be collaborating, but doing even more of it. I'm part of a retrofit working group organised by the Combined Authority. well, Guy's gone now, but I think Guy chairs the registered provider forum across Birmingham. So we are having these conversations, and it's quite remarkable how similar the challenges are across the board. And so we should be looking at how we overcome those challenges jointly, and not all trying to do things individually. So really, really important question. And I think the follow-on part of that question was around kind of how the standards that we are aiming to, or what do we have standards to be meeting. I would say as a local authority, it's still early days. We've learned so much in the last 12, 18 months, and that learning will be taken forward into how we continue to do things. And over the coming period, we'll be actually agreeing between ourselves what it is we want to achieve and how we're going to do it. But yeah, we're getting towards that position.
Great, thanks very much both. Guy, can you hear us okay? I think we've got some signals. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, I just wanted to ask. Okay, well hopefully. I think we've got a little bit of a lag, so hopefully everyone can hear what's going on. Maybe it's just my end. I think we heard from kind of Orbit some of the systems and technology that they're using in addition to energy performance certificates. I just wondered if you could, similarly to kind of one of the questions that was asked, just explain what other technology or systems that you're using in Birmingham to support some of our looking at the kind of insights and data kind of beyond the kind of energy performance certificates and stock condition surveys that have been mentioned.
Probably an overly technical question for myself, and whether Dan can come in. But apologies. I know, so as part of our whole house retrofit pilot in the east of Birmingham, we're aligning the sort of the measures with a digitalisation program, so that we're exploring monitoring mechanisms to enable people living in their homes to more effectively manage what is probably a very new and complex system. And that will provide us with some valuable learning around, once we put measures in, what behaviour change occurs, and how we can learn from that for future projects. I don't know if, Dan, you've got anything more detailed around what that physically looks like, but it's certainly something we can feed back to the team in terms of some of the things that we're doing. But yeah, I mean, it's critical that when we're investing the amount of money that's being invested, both our money and government grant money, that we get the learning and using digital mechanisms to get that learning, monitoring the effectiveness of the value for money that's been spent on those properties, but also how it's enabling people to live better lives in warmer homes, which is what we all want, that is more affordable for them. And we can track those out. I posted some links to the City Observatory, so that's some real valuable information there around fuel poverty levels, etc. And that will be continually refreshed, so that we're monitoring how impactful some of this activity is. Fantastic.
Thanks very much, Guy. And apologies for asking you a very technical question, but I think lots of good feedback on that one. Just some very quick questions now, one for Imi and one for Jenny, if I may. Imi, someone made a very, very pertinent point that actually there are obviously some very active community organisations within the areas in which you're working. And obviously we heard also from Balsall Heath and indeed Acots Green, I know, that who have active communities. But what about those that perhaps don't have that existing community cohesion or level of community participation? Have you got any kind of top tips as to how people perhaps living in those areas or organisations looking to engage in areas where there perhaps isn't a natural place to go and engage with the community, how that might manifest itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of our organising really started at the street scale, like literally pop-ups on the street. You can see from the Walthamstow work that the Power community are doing. They're, door knocking, and they're connecting over mutual aid. They're connecting over energy bills. They're connecting over school runs. They're connecting over these sorts of things. So I think there's multiple layers here. I think that this this it is no doubt going to be most difficult in places where that social and community infrastructure has been dismantled the most. And so, you know, in those places, the starting point isn't to run in with like an offer to retrofit your home straight away, right? The starting point there is going to just be able to be creating spaces around whatever what people are organising around. You know, my example that I used of the Tredegar Medical Aid Society was that those people were locked out of access to health, so they were putting 2p a week together to get professional help, because at that time something like the NHS didn't exist. In communities where that infrastructure is most degraded or less connected, they will be organising around something else. That might be the food bank, that might be things we don't want to actually be honest about. And at that point, there becomes the space where we're able to think, okay, well, how do we organise around connecting? Because and from that point, how do we think about a journey into something like retrofit? And I know that isn't the sexy answer, that isn't the quick answer, but you know, COVID taught us this as well. As crises compound, actually, where people are. What needs to be organised around is where people and communities move, and therefore there will always be something. Whether it looks like it probably won't look like Civic Square. It's actually important it doesn't. You know, Civic Square is something that should not really be remembered, and hopefully will become irrelevant, because actually what we've built is infrastructures that are much more like public goods. And I think what Gemma said is really critical as well, that it is going to be lots of parts of this story coming together. Yes, funding, yes, programs, yes, what we're like labeled as will divide us into different ways of working, but it is going to be so many different ways of working, skills, knowledges, technical, social, you know, mutual aid coming together to understand this as a connected issue. So I would just say that I'd be hard pushed to say there's nowhere, anywhere where people are not meeting, even if it's just the food bank. That requires, like I said, a shift in our mindset about what we think is part of this story. Where do we think we need to go and connect and listen and think about what the most important starting points for interventions and organising in that place are. And, you know, from what I've found, people closest to the most difficult challenges know their issues really, really clearly. In the Retrofit Reimagined talks, if you listen to Kwejo Twenaboa, who talks really deeply about people who are living in the worst quality social housing, you'll be amazed at, like, given the chance, given a moment to talk and share, the level of ingenuity that's coming out of those communities, because they've had to be tapping into their imaginations forever to survive. So I'd say probably places that feel the least able to access are going to be the most transformative places, because actually the way people are creating their own networks and their own mutual aid will be transformative. It's just whether we engage with that as professionals or with a slightly different mindset as we first move into that, I think is going to be critical.
Thanks very much, Imi. And very quickly, finally, because I know that we are slightly running over, but we did give a little bit more time to allow conversation to flow. Jenny, I think one group we haven't necessarily spoken specifically about, but there has been a question quite early on about, is how do architects get involved? Where do you see architects having a role to play in this conversation? Is there anything that you're doing that those architects that are joining the call might get involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I messaged an architect who was on the call. Not sure if he's still here, but yeah. So there is a critical role for architects in retrofit. So retrofit designer is the role specified by PAS 2035, and to be a retrofit designer, all PAS 2035 projects have to specify a retrofit designer, and they have to have a quality assured design pack as part of the project for each individual home. The designer has to design appropriate measures and detailing, to help the installers know exactly how to install the measures onto the property. So the only individuals that can be designers are those who are architects and other sort of allied professions, but it's mainly architects. We've got a course coming out in January, a retrofit designer course. It's the first of its kind. We like to be, trailblazers at the Retrofit Academy. It'll be launched in January, and it's a retrofit designer qualification. It's going to be sort of a level 6 kind of level. So if you do want to receive information about that course when it launches, drop me an email or pop your name in the chat and I can pick it up and we can make sure that you're onto the mailing list. But yeah, it's a critical role in PAS 2035, something that there isn't a qualification or a course for at the moment, and something we're looking to change from January onwards.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jenny. I'm conscious that we've got a few questions that perhaps have been voted further up that we may have not picked up on. Can I just confirm from our colleagues that we've got enough time still? I'm presuming yes, because Graham hasn't come in to kind of say stop. So let's kind of go ahead then. So something that I think has been voted up since we've been talking about, well, there are two things. One is the engagement of private landlords. And I think perhaps I can direct that one towards Dan. And the second one to Gemma is perhaps more in terms of maybe a little bit of an elaboration on what information you are collecting above and beyond EPCs to help feed into that very detailed analysis tool that you showed a screenshot of. So Dan, can I come to you on the private rented sector and kind of how we're starting to engage on that front?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. So I think it's fair to say that on projects we've been involved in so far, the uptake from private landlords has been minimal. Challenging to, or we found it challenging to engage. We have had a few who have engaged, applied for retrofit measures, but then at some point dropped out. And in part, I think we need to see the private rental sector in kind of almost in two parts. There's the more professional end where the kind of the bigger blocks of specifically built apartments where I think a lot of the landlords, the owners, the bigger organizations are absolutely bought into the agenda, a retrofit agenda, but there are the more individual kind of private, potentially smaller private landlords who are less so, and we are certainly finding it harder to engage with. But we need to be engaging with all tenures across the city. So we are doing a lot of work around this, and we through the council we have routes into the private rental sector, and through our licensing part of the council. So we're starting to work with them to better engage with private landlords, and I think do a better job of explaining what the benefits to them are, which I think we need to be doing across the board anyway. But yeah, so there's a lot of work to do there, but I think we have a plan of how we're going to go about it.
Great, thanks, Dan. And Gemma, the kind of data question, if I can hand over to you.
Yeah, so in terms of EPC, obviously there's your EPC banding, EPCC, which everyone knows about, everyone utilises a KPI metric, whilst potentially I may not agree with that to get to net zero carbon because it's conflicting kind of storyline. I think there are bits that can be collected through SAP, which is obviously the algorithm behind an EPC that can be really, really insightful. So as I say, like using softwares like Parity Project, you can kind of see the heat demand scores, the kilowatt hour usage. Okay, it's based on an average algorithm kind of thing, but also the operational carbon and also grid predictions. In terms of our Power BI tool, obviously we put our asset management software so we can see when components are actually due for replacement. I think that's really, really vital, and we all have done a piece of work because we really want to look not just at operational carbon when we're doing this retrofit journey and reducing carbon, but we also want to see about our embodied carbon. So taking components out early from a retrofit process, it's not common sense from a fiscal perspective or from an embodied carbon perspective. We also bring in areas like the conservation area where the buildings are listed. Obviously, you saw on the tool we have our Google Maps. We have our Thriving Community score as well, so we can see kind of how the area is scoring in terms of is there anything we can pick up on. But I just think that having that tool has really allowed us to see all of these really important pieces of data to make well-informed decisions. And I think that's what is necessary in all of this. If we're just using EPC data from an EPCD perspective, that isn't the right thing to drive a retrofit program. You need either the data kind of sitting behind that EPC, but also overlaying with your asset management software. But I can understand it's very, very challenging for a lot of businesses to get that data. So I think it's a journey, and I think it's really, really important. And I think as long as you start on that journey and keep going on it, then good things will come.
Great, thanks very much, Gemma. So I'm going to pick up one question, if I may, around the role of district. I can obviously only speak specifically for what's happening within the city, but certainly I know there's some very active work underway in many other West Midlands authorities, as well as the wider country, on this space. And you may or may not be aware, those in the conference, that there is a proposal through the Energy Security Bill to introduce something called heat network zoning, which would effectively lead to a mandate in designated zones for connections of certain types of buildings or certain demands of energy or demands for heat, and certainly the kind of new build sector, to connect to a district energy network where one exists or where one is forthcoming. So that's going to fundamentally change the status quo in terms of the role of district energy in those zone areas. And the rationale behind that, which is being driven by the Department for Energy Security Net Zero, is that we know that heat decarbonisation is one of the most tricky areas of carbon emissions to reduce, because it's about individual properties, individual systems, and obviously a wider impact about what an efficient alternative needs to look like, and how that relates also to fabric improvements, and obviously engagement and understanding about the different ways in which you use systems. But there are a number of local authorities who have been working with central government to identify where those zones might apply. So that is a piece of work that Birmingham City Council has been directly involved in, and we're kind of hoping to start the next phase of, okay, well, what does this actually mean for the city, and to start talking then to obviously areas about where zones may or may not present an opportunity. So I think in terms of individual buildings, individual homes, I think it's unlikely, certainly in the current policy drafting, that individual homes will be mandated to connect. That being said, if you are living in an area where there is a hot water pipe going to be going down your street in order to connect to another building, there could be a very valuable benefit for connecting into that heat network. So I think it depends on the locality, and in particular where these zones start to emerge through the policy, which is due to be passed through Parliament by 2025. So they're on quite a close trajectory. What we do have, however, in the city, and Gemma, you may also have some in your own stock, is 34 obviously we'll be looking very closely at the opportunities for district energy and decarbonisation there, plus obviously those that are already connected to the district energy network within the city. So for us, I think there will be particular localities where district energy may play a role, or district heating may play a role for certain homes. But I think it's very dependent on locality, and ultimately the kind of balance of value for money of installing a hot water pipe into the system and the necessary systems inside the property versus an individual building system. So hopefully that kind of picks up on that particular question. I think there were some other kind of quite specific kind of queries that have been picked up. However, I think this is quite an interesting one that's come through quite kind of last minute. So we're quite early, as Dan said, in terms of Birmingham City Council, we're quite early on in our retrofit journey in terms of understanding how we develop these programs. We need to develop them, picking up on a number of the points that Imi and the earlier presentation from Borsal Heath indicated, and obviously how we use technology, how we use insights, the data that we need, and obviously the skill sets that we need to develop. So it's a very complex system that needs fixing at a number of levels. But I think the question that's come around is around how we can share as a city council our experience more directly, and have we got things that we would say are a model to emulate at this point? Do we consider ourselves to be at the journey, which I think we've already said we are. And what are we perhaps learning also, Dan, if I can ask you, and Gemma as well, from other local authorities, because we're all taking slightly different approaches at different stages. But what would you say, Dan, have been your kind of takeaways, and what do you think we can share? But vice versa, what are we learning from others?
That's a really good question. I think I wouldn't say there's one particular local authority that we're learning everything from. I think each local authority is doing, or a lot of local authorities are doing something well that we can learn from. So we've had, or I've been in sessions with Leeds. We're speaking to Greater Manchester, Sheffield. I'm in quite regular talks with the London councils and some of the local authorities around London. So and learning from each other. I think Birmingham, we are at the beginning of our journey. I think we're doing some things well. Whilst I feel we've been quite successful in some areas, I think we can do so much better. But still, we're sharing what we have learned, and we're doing a lot of sharing as well around the negative lessons learned, not just the positive ones, and being very open around where things haven't worked, where things have gone wrong, because I think that's the way we can all learn for the best. We can sing, and we probably will sing about the successes we have, of course, but where we really learn is looking at how we do the things that went wrong better.
Great, thanks, Dan. A very nice response. Gemma, or anyone else indeed from the panel, is there any other kind of observations or comments you would like to make?
So I think from our perspective, I think looking at alternative funding avenues is a big one. And I think that goes away from relying on that government funding element, especially for housing providers. I think we've all been, that's what our focus has been, going for those bids, going for SHDF funding. And I think looking into ways that we can, fund things alternatively. So for instance, energy as a service and things like that, where, the electrification of all those heating systems like you were talking about, Ellie, it's high value, work, and it's going to be a big investment piece. So anything that housing providers can share and learnings from that. And there's some great work going on from other HAs that I've spoken to. So I think it's going to that collaboration again, and that really being key to kind of future-proof our properties. So not just net zero carbon, but future-proofing the energy that we can provide to our customers, and reduced energy costs potentially through solar power and PV generation, but also future-proofing it against climate adaptation. We've spoken a lot about mitigation today, but there is that big piece that we've seen, and how wet it's been recently. That climate adaptation also needs to happen to our properties. So I think sharing kind of anything we can do in that, I think it's all about collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gemma. And I think it's very pertinent that you've kind of raised that resilience and adaptation point, because we've obviously talked today, and kind of Emmy's spoken very eloquently about the broader kind of interlinkages. It's not just about retrofit, it's about a whole host of other kind of interrelated points. But I think it's really important that we forget that the climate emergency is an issue of two critical parts, and one really relies on the other. It was just yesterday that we were hosting a schools model COP event in our chamber, and one of the big topics of conversation was around the natural environment and around the distribution of environmental justice, or in some cases environmental injustice, around where kind of natural green space, for example, was interlinked with actually areas where perhaps people were least able to access and then go and benefit from green space. And obviously the interlinkages between the natural environment, both kind of good quality air, as well as biodiversity, as well as obviously climate resilience, but also importantly around the kind of stress and anxiety and the public health benefits of green space. But actually there's quite a lack of equal distribution of that. We've done some work on climate risks and vulnerabilities that shows actually quite a lot of correlation between areas where people are most at risk and most vulnerable, along with areas where people have perhaps least economic access to different green spaces. So I think it's a really, really critical point that obviously we've not focused and zoned in on today, but I think retrofit considering both of those dynamics is going to be really important. And I think we did hear maybe last year from Midland Heart about how they're trying to integrate also the climate resilience piece into their retrofit works through, for example, sizes of eaves and sizes of downpipes, that kind of thing. So yeah, maybe a topic for one of the sessions that we have next year, Graham and Sophie, when we start to kind of plan ahead for that in more detail. So we are running fairly close to the end of today's session. I think it's been certainly from my perspective, really, really valuable and really illuminating to hear from our various different speakers. Not everyone who's here today will have been with us last year. And some of obviously the topics of conversation are kind of carrying on from last year as well. But I wondered whether or not I might just ask the panel in a short sentence or two, just to reflect on how we think things have moved, not necessarily just in Birmingham, but kind of generally on this agenda in the last 12 months, because I think the consciousness, the reach, and probably the variety of different people represented today is really starting to kind of strengthen this narrative. And certainly, obviously, men have been championing this for a very long time, but I think there's a momentum growing, and I'd just be really interested in with your short reflection on whether or not you think we've moved forward in the last 12 months, in whatever way and perspective you want to present that. So I'm going to come to you, Dan, first, because you're our BCC rep.
Sophie told me you were going to do that. I think it's a really good question. I think in many ways we've made progress, and I think from my perspective, it's as much about what we've learned as the direct progress we've made, and particularly the work that I've been involved in around lads and how we need to do things differently, and how we can't just continue doing things to communities. We need to absolutely be with community, or even led by, I would say. And so I think we've learned a huge amount that we can now start to really implement. There's so much more to learn, but I think we've learned a massive amount in this last year.
Thanks, Dan. Jenny?
Yeah, I think I was going to say a very similar thing to what Dan said about the importance of community engagement. We've done a lot of work with local authorities across the Midlands during the past sort of year and a bit, really, working with the Midlands Net Zero Hub and trying to support local authorities that are trying to deliver projects. And one of the areas they really struggle with is actually the retrofit advice and agreement. The agreement bit needs to be stressed as well. It's not just about giving advice. It's about getting the agreement from the tenant that this is going to happen to the property they live in, and actually working with tenants to make sure that they're okay with that, and that they understand when things might happen, and when people might turn up and start drilling things into their walls and roofs and things. So that's the area where there's more of a need, really, and it should be people led. This is about, it's a technical. I always think about retrofit as it is techie. Obviously, there's a huge amount of stuff I haven't got a clue. I don't understand U values and things at all. I'm not a technical person. I'm sure Gemma does, but or other people hopefully involved in retrofit do. I know they do. But it's a very technical thing that we're doing to the places we live in, and I think we can't forget that. People are at the heart of it, and we need to work with people because it's about their lives. Yes, it's about the climate, but it's also about their lives and making their properties, their homes, much better for them. I'm from a training organisation, so excuse the link back into one of our courses, but it is a proxy for this, I think. We launched a retrofit advisor course last week, and if it was a product, you'd say it's flew off the shelves. It's the one that has kind of really surprised us in terms of the demand for this course. And I think that just goes to show that, that mix of providing information, advice and guidance, energy advice, through customer support, customer service skills is really, really important as part of any retrofit project.
Great, thanks. Same question for you, Imi, if I may.
So I guess as someone who just finished a festival that was across like many neighbourhoods in England, Scotland and Wales, I think that the difference between last year and this year is the breadth of people who are engaging in this conversation and understand retrofit as one leverage point for a much wider transformation. The interlinkages between the way these systems interplay from the natural environment, ecological implications, the quality of their air, the home they live in, the questions that communities are asking rightly. So, okay, if we look at all this data and we're insulating our homes, what happens when they get too hot? Because isn't that one of the next problems? And, you know, and this idea that actually really at the heart of our communities is a really deep and systemic wisdom. So I would say that, you know, it's interesting because I'd say people like us have been like entertainment on the side for a few years, kind of, oh, that's nice, that's lovely, it's lovely what they're doing. And then it's like been like very, very at the core of looking at Balsall Heath retrofit, places where things are happening really transformatively. It's where that interplay between many different people, the council, different actors, different spaces are coming together. So I'd say, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if I think I'm allowed to say this, but I wouldn't be surprised that in the turn of the next government that actually the transformation and the wider transition we need isn't seen even more radically and boldly through how we retrofit the places that we live in. And I think that there is so much knowledge, wisdom, organising now happening that I think it feels like a really hopeful time for me. And I just say that to finish, like the carbon tunnel vision is important. Like carbon is important, but not to have it tunnel vision to the end of days, and we forget that this is an interconnected system between water, soil, where we live, rising temperatures, skills, how we bring people on a journey. And so the more you can situate yourselves in this sector amongst many other actors, the better, the richer the work will be. We've got so many of the technical solutions now. This is really a massive sort of societal and social organising moment. And yeah, I'm just really grateful that Birmingham is hosting these conversations, because I think it will be a place where hopefully we'll be able to show lots of different scales of this work and what it will mean for the future.
Thanks very much, Imi. I'm very conscious we're overrunning, but Gemma, I would like to ask you that question as well. So, and then we'll wrap up as rapidly as we can. Thank you for bearing with us.
Yeah, no worries. So I think in the short time that I've kind of been in housing, I think the understanding and the drive has really, really grown. And I'm really, really proud of that, because I think even when there's been mixed news or mixed messages from the powers that be above us, I think the foot hasn't gone off the accelerator in terms of retrofit. And I think it has been extremely challenging. You know, there's not that kind of assurance from the government that the grid is going to be decarbonised by 20, I think they said 2035 at one point, didn't they? So 2050, say. We need those assurances. And it's really challenging when you're trying to hit net zero carbon when there's no clear definition of what a net zero carbon property is. But I just think as a community, you know, like as a retrofit drive, we are still delivering and we're still going for it. And I think that's the tenacity that needs to happen in trying to deliver net zero carbon, whatever that definition may come out to be. But yeah, I just think it's really great. The understanding and the drive is still there.
Thanks very much, Gemma. So just to kind of wrap up from the panel side, I think it's been a really exciting, interesting, and I think, to use Imi's word, kind of hopeful conversation. And it's great to hear that everyone in their own perspective feels that we're moving in the right direction. Clearly there's a lot of challenges, and I would echo Dan's point that actually we mustn't forget to share and also learn from the experiences, whatever they are, positive or negative. So thank you very, very much indeed for all of the panel people for joining us today. Just to say very quickly, for those questions we haven't specifically come to and haven't picked up on at all, I think we will look to endeavour to respond and share some responses to you. I'm conscious there are a couple of questions that probably need us to involve Guy as well. And there was also a question around engagement of cabinet members, which I think is a kind of an excellent kind of segue into our event next year. And I would suggest that we really look to engage in a more kind of active panel discussion, if we can kind of get the schedule in their diaries to do so, which I know they're hugely supportive of this, then that would be a really good way of doing that. So we will absolutely take that away as a comment around how we can make sure that we get the right engagement. So I think it's probably back over to you, Graham, to close out, if I may.
Brilliant. Yeah, and thanks so much for all your contributions, those that have been able to hang back and allow us to overrun and keep that conversation flowing, which was a very valuable thing to be able to do. So thanks again, and excellent chairing, Ellie and team. Thanks to all of you for enabling us to work with you on this somewhat sort of compressed event, but as you've alluded to, we can expand on many of the points raised today in the longer week that we have planned for May next year that I talked to you all about earlier. So Tony, cameras and mics off now. You can sort of relax, go and get that coffee that I know we're all desperate for, or probably lunch now, actually, and I'll just wrap up. But thanks again for all of you that managed to stay with us for that last extended session, over an hour there of panel session, but very well worth doing. We're going to wrap up now. We're going to move back to the table so you can carry on those conversations. Some of the speakers will still be in the room, so you can track them down. We'll be following up with a short survey. We'll ask you to complete that. If you've asked for CPD certification, that will follow through automatically for those that have attended today. We'll also make available all of the recordings from all of the sessions today as quickly as we can. So look out for that as a instructions to access that in your inbox as well. We'll be back in the new year with news, more news about Retrofit Action Week West Midlands. As I mentioned, mid-May, I should remember these dates by now, 11th to the 19th of May next year, including a 3-morning summit, expanding upon many of these discussions that we've had today, but also going out into communities as well. So watch the space on that one, or just inquire with us directly if you'd like to get involved at an early stage. So let's go back to the tables now. Happy to have those conversations, and then we will wrap up the entire event at 12:30 to enable everyone to get on with their lives and have something to eat, I guess. So thanks again for everyone, and we'll see you soon.